So this show is in its third season, and for the first time ever, we're covering a sequel to a game we covered in a previous episode. Now personally, I wouldn't recommend watching the Planet Robobot video. It hasn't aged well, and while it is unique in comparisons to season 2 and 3, that's not always a good thing. But just to sum up that video, I loved Planet Robobot, and at the time I said it was my favorite Kirby game. Since then, however, I've come around to believing that Planet Robobot is actually the best Kirby game. So in comparison, Star Allies had a lot to live up to. Now, I did try to go into this with an open mind, but comparing the two games is kind of inevitable, as well as comparing the game to Planet Robobot's predecessors, Triple Deluxe and Return to Dreamland. So for the rest of the video, I'll be referring to these games as RTPS, but I'm pronouncing it RTPS because lack of vowel, and it just makes things easier to do. I want to spend very little time going over the basics of gameplay. So this game plays like the previous 3 Kirby games. It's a platformer in which you can fly. You can also inhale certain enemies to obtain their copy abilities, of which this game has 27. With these copy abilities, you can make your way through levels, fight enemies, solve puzzles, and defeat bosses. That's all the basics that apply to honestly a majority of Kirby games, not just the RTPS ones. There are both returning and new unique features to this game. Some we'll talk about now, others we'll get to later. First, let's talk about copy abilities. 20 of which are in a majority of Kirby games, in one form or another. 3 of which have been in previous games, but haven't been seen for a while, or have been updated for this game, and then the last 4 are brand new and unique to this game. First, we have Festival, which works kind of like Crash and Mike. It's a one-time screen clearing attack, and it really isn't that useful. Artist has you swinging around a paintbrush, painting allies, and creating sculptures. It's an okay ability, and it does have the bonus of providing healing items. Next is Spider, which has you flinging around webs and jumping on webs. It also has an invincible guard, which is really useful. Lastly, there's Staff, which is kind of like Spear, but even more of a powerhouse, especially when combined with other abilities. Speaking of which, arguably the main gimmick of this game is combining abilities. The most common way you'll see this is with weapon abilities like Sword, Cutter, and Staff, in which if you have an element, you can apply that element to a weapon and it changes the weapon and adds more power. The elements you can add are fire, ice, water, electric, and wind. The other type of combination ability is when 2 specific copy abilities combine, like combining ice and water creates long-range icicle spears, and combining painting and stone makes a giant painted stone statue. And then there's a few other ability-specific powers, like how fighting, beetle, suplex, and cleaning can all do some variation on friend throw, and how Parasol has the friendbrella. Then there's friend abilities, which have all the players joining up to form a friend circle or a friend bridge or a friend train. And with the exception of Friend Star, I'd argue most of these friend abilities are either not that special or so rarely used they don't even matter. Now, overall the gameplay is fine, but the one problem with how this game plays is how it handles collectibles. Now, most games that use the RTPS formula have some form of main collectibles. Return to Dreamland had energy spears, Triple Deluxe had sunstones, Planet Robobot had code cubes, and this game doesn't have anything like that. Because of that, I feel like this game suffers. In other games, the collectibles acted as a challenge. Most were gotten through either beating enemies or solving puzzles. And to get to the world's boss, you had to collect a few, but not all of the collectibles. In this game, the lack of collectible means that Star Allies doesn't have this minimum boss fight barrier, and it's lacking in some of the challenge rooms, which these collectibles could have been hidden in. Now, that doesn't mean this game doesn't have collectibles. It does, in the form of puzzle pieces. You can find standard puzzle pieces in every level and rainbow puzzle pieces in specific levels. However, these collectibles aren't like the ones I just named, but instead like the keychains in Triple Deluxe and the stickers in Planet Robobot. In those games, those collectibles were basically just collectible pieces of art, and that's what the puzzle pieces are here. As you collect them, you fill in one of several puzzles, and while it's nice to have them, they clearly aren't as important as the collectibles in the other RTPS games. The other problem with puzzle pieces is that you can get repeats. Now, you can get repeats of keychains and stickers, but because the puzzle pieces are more visually based, and there are a bunch of them, the repeats feel more invasive than in those games. Then there's the multiplayer, which alongside combining abilities, was one of the main gimmicks of this game. Now, this was also the main gimmick of Return to Dreamland, and honestly, I kinda think this game does it better. Now, while there were selected characters you could play as in Return to Dreamland, or you could play as Kirby's, I guess, even though I rarely saw people do that. In this game, you throw hearts that transform enemies into allies, hence the name, Star Allies. This removes some of the predeterminedness of Return to Dreamland, while also blending well with the gimmicks of combining abilities, because you can only combine abilities with allies. Having 4 varied allies at one moment is very useful. However, there are also Dream Palaces, in which you can get Dream Allies, which currently it's Kirby's friends from Return to Dreamland, but they are adding new ones in future updates. Now, if you're playing single player or with less than 4 people, you have CPU allies. The AI on the CPUs is simultaneously good and bad. When it comes to puzzle solving, they can usually do their job, as long as they know what they have to do. One of the problems is that, let's say you have to give an ally a specific combination ability that you don't want. It's almost impossible to get them to get that without you also getting it. They do also occasionally get stuck on walls or overpass you yourself have already gone on. Basically what I'm saying is that the AI can be slow at picking up certain key stimuli from time to time. Then when it comes to combat ability, they're mostly fine. They can kill enemies when needed, even though I feel like they don't damage bosses as much as they could. Which, even still, I will admit having multiple allies does making killing bosses easier, and unlike other games, I feel like this game doesn't scale when you go into bosses with multiple allies. Then there's actually playing with other players. Because I am a know-it-all with Kirby, when it comes to playing with other people who didn't know as much about Kirby as I did, I felt like there were multiple times where I was either barreling ahead with them, or I was having to stay behind and let them proceed without me. Also, in my experience, friend abilities aren't as friendly with multiple people. But overall, I still had a good time, and I do feel like this game does handle multiplayer better than other games like the new Super Mario Bros. Series. The game is broken up into 4 worlds, which may not seem like much, but unlike other Ritz games, which are generally 6 worlds with 5 levels and a boss, this game breaks it up with some worlds having multiple levels and each world having multiple bosses, especially in the last world. When it comes to level design, you have your classic field, ice, ocean, lava, with some semi-classical towers and caves and ruins, and then surprisingly no desert. No world follows one specific theme, and most of the time you see almost all of the themes in a single world, which is nice for originality, but not nice for pacing. In certain levels, you can also find a giant button which unlocks extra levels. Sometimes the extra levels are based around combining abilities, other times they show off some sort of challenger gimmick. Now, when it comes to the level design, I want to use Extra Level Alpha as my example. In this level, you travel through doors that take you from a variant of day, to a variant of dusk, and into a variant of night. During each of these times, the layout and enemies are slightly different. You have to switch between the 3 times to navigate the level and solve the puzzle. Now overall, I like this gimmick. I think it's pretty neat. However, I feel like the game doesn't use it to its full potential. All you have to do is solve a single puzzle involving fire and an electric hammer, and then you move on. The game uses this concept to its bare minimum, and then introduces another gimmick it barely uses. And this goes on and on, over and over again. There is only a single stage in this game which has the 4 players break off into separate paths, a mechanic the entire game could be based around. And that's my problem with the level designs. All the good ideas are severely underused. There are also a few modes and mini-games available outside the main game. The mini-games are Star Slam Heroes, which is basically a variant of Megaton Punch from Superstar. Then there's Chomp Champs, which is basically a glorified Mario Party minigame with all the same depth as those mini-games. Both of these games aren't involved and I don't really care for them. Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot did the mini-games a lot better, even if they lack depth. Then there's Guest Stars, which is this extra mode, kind of like DDD Tour or Meta Nightmare Returns, in which you speedrun through the main campaign with variations and more difficult bosses. The gimmick this time, though, is you can play as any one of your allies from the main game, which is a really nice touch and allows for more replayability. Finally, there's the Ultimate Choice, which is a boss rush like the Arena or the True Arena, kind of mixed into one. This time, however, there's a difficulty slider, which allows you to pick which difficulty you want to battle out. It's basically a sell your soul to Satan meter from Sakurai games like Smash Bros. And Kid Icarus Uprising. This game has way better graphics than it has any right to. The game looks beautiful, and that's not something I expected from a Kirby game. Now, the game does run at 30 frames per second, which I know some people will have a problem with, but personally, I didn't even notice. I also do want to point out that I loved the character designs, which are really good and really expressive. Many people, myself included, have said in the past that the music in Kirby games are better than they have any right to be. Star Allies is no exception to this rule. With remakes of old tracks and brand new ones, it's great all around. One of my favorite songs is Zan Partizan's battle theme. Now, before we get into this, I do want to point out that Kirby games are notoriously easy. If you remember that difficulty scale I made in the Celeste review, I put 2 Kirby games on that, and they're both at the lower end. Let's also not forget that Kirby's Epic Yarn is infamous for being so easy that you can't even die in it. The thing is though, I know all of this, and even games like Epic Yarn that are notoriously easy, I still find enjoyment in. With that being said though, I do have to admit, Kirby Star Allies is a really easy game. Not as easy as Epic Yarn, I don't think anything can be easier than Epic Yarn, but still pretty easy. Throughout the entire game, I only died twice. Once in a pit, and once to the final boss. That's it. The platforming and related obstacles are not difficult at all. I mean, Kirby's a platformer in which you can fly, so yeah. The enemies and bosses aren't that hard, but that's not the problem, because I enjoyed fighting a majority of them. When it comes to puzzles, they're not that complicated, and there also aren't that many of them, which, like most Ritz games, the copy abilities needed to complete the puzzle is given to you either in or directly outside of the room with the puzzle. Then there's the life system, in which had a change I thought would be for the better, but maybe not. Now, in previous games using the Ritz formula, when you quit the game, all of your lives you had gathered during a session were lost, and you started back over with roughly 7, depending on the game. In this game, however, lives are saved through every session, so you build up as many lives as needed. In most games, this wouldn't have been a bad thing, but as already established, this game is easy. So I beat the game with over 140 lives. Honestly, once I passed 30 lives, the notion of dying in this game just meant nothing at all. And while I should probably knock the game for this change, I'm not particularly going to, because this was a feature I actually wanted, and it doesn't really break any particular mechanics, so let's call it even. Now, when we get into the ending score, I think it's important to know my thoughts on the final boss. So I'm going to talk about it now and nowhere else in this video. If you don't want endgame spoilers, skip ahead to this time. You have been warned. So, you start off in Dreamland, then you go to Popstar, then the Jam Bastion, ending off traveling through the galaxy. The sense of scale in this game can be a little epic, but it can also be underwhelming. Throughout your adventure, you fight the generals of magic, Francesca, Flameberg, and Zan Partizan. I loved these boss fights, with all 3 of these characters, and I think their flavor text is really nice. Then you fight Lord Highness, who is a leader who then becomes a joke. It's an okay boss fight, but after you beat him, he sacrifices himself to summon his Dark Lord, the Void Termina. This is a final boss fight I can only describe as Majora's Mask themed, and is one of my favorites in all of Kirby. You go between fighting him in a 3D shooter section to going inside and fighting his core. The balance between these 4 phases of the boss work perfectly with great execution. The boss also turns into dark matter, which is pretty neat. Now, throughout this video, I've said some good things about Star Allies. I've also said some not so good things. For all the good things it does, I do feel as if the game never goes all the way, or never takes any one thing to its fullest potential. It's a mixed bag of good ideas with poor execution. I guess you could say it's a double-edged sword. But at the end of the day, personally, I had a lot of fun with this game. It's not one of my favorite Kirby games, but I had a good time. I'm just gonna say it right now, I'm giving this game a grade. I had a blast with it, but you may not, and that's fine. If you're interested in this game based on what I said in this video, you may have a good time. If the problems addressed in this video are too much for you, then yeah, I get it. And this game probably isn't your style. And if you're looking for another Kirby game, you will definitely find it. But I do stand by there are other Kirby games that have done the Ritz formula better, which I think think gets to one of the core problems with this game. This is the fourth Kirby game to use the Ritz formula, with just a new gimmick stacked on top. While I wouldn't say Star Allies is the worst game to use this formula, I do agree that it is time to move on and do something else. Maybe it's finally time to get that fully 3D, all of 64 and Galaxy, Kirby platformer that people have been asking for. Maybe it's time to go back and take another stab at Amazing Mirror's open world formula. Or maybe it's time to do something entirely new with Kirby. I would say sky's the limit, but Kirby has been to the farthest reaches of the galaxy and other dimensions, so anything's possible.